why do commodities trend? Like, why should we expect them to trend?
You're like, God damn it, Chris, you take a long time to get your point. Okay, so yes, so this is like, look, behaviorally speaking, you can say lots of reasons why people trend. And a lot of the synchronicity or like a flow of information, I want to do what other people are doing. There's a lot of arguments you can make for trend following. But I think there's one, and this is like when I first, and I think like man, the economists just get this wrong, and they get it wrong so badly. And you hear this all the time, and you kind of go like, because like they'll look at this world in a deterministic sense. They look at it and they say like, what's our supply? What's our demand? We have this much crude. We have this much demand for crude. The price should be here. Here's the market clearing price. It should be this. And anything other than that is like speculators causing volatility. You're like, that's maybe, but like the thing is like when I would say once again, coming from cross discipline, you know, when I first started, like and I did actuarial science, and so one of the courses I took was operational research, and they had this like I thought it was a really cool course on the theory behind how lines are formed, right? It's called queuing theory, and so like there's some takeaways like, you know, like it's more efficient, you know, to have 4 lines to so do you have 4 lines to 4 cashiers, or do you have one long line that splits off to the 4? You know, it's always better to have one line that splits off to the 4 because the expectation is the same, but there's way less standard deviation. You can get in the slow line or the fast line and wait longer, wait less, and like same expected return, but less risk. And you're like, yeah, you should always have one queue, and that's kind of like, that was a takeaway of queuing theory. But like the one that really kind of struck me was you can model the distribution of risk. And I know that like, you know, Nassim Taleb, like he talks about this all the time. It's like people always think everything is a normal distribution, and in many cases, and everyone always thinks normal distribution. Like when we're pricing volatility commodities, we think normal distribution. We go like, where can it go? What is the range of possible outcomes? And you go, I don't know, 20% vol, and I think this. And you go, and it gets it completely wrong, and it gets it completely wrong because it misses like a very, very important dynamic in the market, which is, you know, if you think about a cashier, this is like a one queue, one line up, and a cashier can handle one person a minute. You go, that's great. Like one person shows up every minute, and it takes me a minute to deal with them, and I'll never have a line. So people show up every minute, and I take a minute to burn through them, and I never have a line. And that's true. So like you call it like equilibrium, no line. And so you call it the clearing price. And if anyone shows up like you know, it takes longer than a minute to show up, there'll never be a line. If they show up anything less than a minute, the line will go infinitely long. So but you say like there's a clearing price, and now you go, okay, all right, let's say we clear. Let's say we go like we can handle 1 person per minute, and 1 person per minute shows up, and now you can say like, let's say we introduce a little bit of stochastic nature to this, a little bit of like randomness to the arrival price. So it's still on average 1 person per minute, but let's see how that changes the system. And the answer is it completely changes the distribution of how long you should expect to wait in a line. Because what you find out is like, okay, so you show up and maybe like, you know, someone shows up, and a minute and a half later someone shows up, and a minute and a half later someone shows up, no line still. And then suddenly someone shows up, and 30 seconds later someone shows, and 30 seconds later someone shows. And now the second person's waiting 30 seconds, the next person's waiting a minute and a half, and if someone else shows, because it only burns down at 1 person per minute. And so this line, it builds up quickly and it burns down. And so every now and then it gets really, really fat-tailed. And then it burns down and then it sits empty. And most of the time it's empty. And this is a system that completely clears, but suddenly it's got a line like 10% of the time. And sometimes that line is like gets quite long. And they go, okay, let's introduce another source of stochastic noise. The cashier, on average, takes a minute, but sometimes takes 30 seconds, sometimes it takes a minute and a half. And right, so you model this whole thing with Poisson distributions, with exponential windows for arrival times, and you model it all, and there's a distribution that gets created, because now sometimes people show up, like 3 people show up in a minute, and sometimes it takes 3 minutes to do someone, and suddenly this line can get really, really long. And that's like a system that clears. It clears perfectly, supply and demand match, but at the end of the day, just through some randomness of supply and demand, like you know, noise, you get these incredibly long lines. And so like clearly the analogy to commodities is you never get a line, you get a price. You get like, how much do I have to pay? And like, if I really need this thing, how much am I going to pay to get there? And you'll see that like most of the time it clears, and sometimes it's empty and the price gets very, very low, and occasionally it goes way further than you think it does, because it's not normal. There's nothing normal about that distribution. It's a very, very, very fat-tailed distribution. And so you can go like, why did the price of sugar go from 2 to 20 and then back to 2? You know, and it's like, well, it's because there's a stochastic noise to this thing, and there's no way to introduce new cues quickly, right? And so if you could introduce as many cues as you need to and take them away as quickly as possible, then there'd be no problem. But the fact is, like, there's a stickiness. It takes a while to build a new mine or to grow a new field, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. And at the same time, like, you know, like all the vagaries of demand side, where it's like, if the price of this gets cheaper, I'm going to like move over here, and so like at the end of the day, like the main takeaway is like commodities kind of have to trend. They have to occasionally, because the underlying like process is so completely nonlinear.